Hey, Kevin Lawrence here, and I'm thrilled to be here today with Amish Shah from Kem Krest. Kem Krest is a business that's established in 1979, way, way back. Thankfully, that was actually after I was born, but it's a family-owned business, and they do supply chain management serving OEM manufacturers in automotive and motorsports in the US. And they basically own the supply chain or parts of the supply chain for them, whether it's for service parts or chemicals, accessories, etc., to drive to their OEMs and to the dealership networks. And in many ways, it's a outsourced partner to bring it all to life, so they don't have to worry about that part of their business. So, and their mission or their purpose, is what they call it, is to create a frictionless experience for customers and the easy button. And I like that easy button. It's a nice, simple way to see it, making it easy. And each wants to make it easy. So, yeah. So today we're just going to talk about, we Julia on our team and Amish had some conversations. Let's produce this case study about Amish's growth experience in the last, couple years, 18 months. And he's been doing it for a while, but he went through some major growth and improvements to the company and is learning as a CEO. I want to take in and let Amish share a bit of a story so it can be valuable to other CEOs on their own journeys. So Amish, thanks for making the time for this today.
Yeah, Kevin, thanks for having me. This is outstanding, and I've really enjoyed just kind of sharing the story. And as we publish this case study, sometimes it brings back a little bit of pain or memories when you're going through the journey. Not that we're out of the woods at all, but kind of going back to the initial stages of this, the first few steps of this journey, and even going into that abyss before you and I had connected. And we'll talk about it, I'm sure, later. But some of the, as we call it, the Hail Marys that I threw to try and get me out of that, and how those failed, and until I kind of got to a more regimented and systematic process. Now it feels good to talk about because we are, we've got the visibility to where we need to go, and it's been quite a ride.
Yeah, it's a little easier when you're on the other side, and it is at the early stages. It's pretty rough. So give some context, like, because you've been doing this for many, many years, and then you got into a bit of a rough growth patch. 18 months, 24 months ago. Can you kind of explain where you're at? And then we can talk about your journey and kind of your learning and your experience through that.
Yeah, so believe it or not, this year will be my 28th year of being with the organization. When I started, we were very small. I mean, I started at a company that really wasn't a company. It was a division of a family business that did less than $1 million in sales. And I had this vision of what I thought a problem in the industry was, and it was a bold vision. It was really to look at the automotive chemical supply chain and transform it. And that's a big space for a young 22-year-old guy to jump in. Yeah. And it's funny, I kind of created this overall vision, this process, and it was mostly through brute force. It's like, put your head down, get it together. You get a little bit lucky. The service we created was actually good. It worked. It was effective. And it took a long time to really, at first we got one customer. We focused on that one customer. That was a big one customer that gives us the bear hug. So it was really hard to look at, I'd say, growing outside of that. But we perfected a model, and then we shared that model with others. So we started with GM, then we went to Ford, and then we went to Nissan and Hyundai. And over years, I think there was a couple times where we got stuck, maybe from a growth standpoint, but we realized why we got stuck is we needed to acquire. We couldn't build the skill set fast enough. So we got stuck. We acquire a complementary business, we'd push on. And so your question of where we are now is we had 20 years of really great growth, explosive growth, year over year over year. Yeah, and there was the occasional pothole, but they weren't unnavigable. There were things that we just had to get back together and figure it out. And what happened really, it was a 4-year, I'd say, decline. And starting in 19, things started to slow down. Our business got more complicated. You get a little bit bigger. It sometimes gets harder to grow because the next challenge is actually a little bit more complex. And look, I had great people that got me where I was at, and I'm grateful for them. But what I started to realize was there was a greater burden on my shoulders, and maybe a burden that was too much for just me as an individual entrepreneur and CEO to work through. And, that's when you and I started working together. And one of the first things that you'd said to me is, it's really about A players. And I'll never forget when you asked me, well, what's the percentage of A players on your executive team? And I said, well, 100%, and you had the same look on your face. You looked at my rubric that I created and you listened, you didn't say anything. And then you listened over the course of the next several months of the challenges that I had. And, we started with people, because it's, like they say, first who, then what? And I was trying to fix a problem on my own. That was the biggest challenge. And then as we got through the people issue, then it was around strategy and strategy process. We had maybe a more cumbersome or complicated strategy process that we were using. We didn't have a one-page plan. We had a lot of metrics, but we weren't focused on the key drivers of what's driving our economics, what's driving our costs, what's driving our
How did you
success.
know? How did you know that it wasn't focused on the key drivers? Because a lot of people get to that stage where
Yeah.
it's bigger and it's complex, and sometimes people think it's supposed to be, which
Yeah.
is challenging. But what was telling you that something needed to change on that? And then we'll also go back to the people. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a great question. We would sit in our strategy room. We used to have a strategy room, and all the wall was filled with metrics and data and charts. And we would sit monthly for 5 hours in these rooms. And there were times where we're leaving the room and everybody feels kind of good because a lot of the metrics are green. The problem that I had was my balance sheet was bad. I had inventory issues. My margin was degrading. Like there were some real issues. So it was
Mm,
almost like, yes, there's so many green metrics, but those green metrics aren't the drivers of the business. So here you
right.
spend half a day with all of your team. Everybody's like, great, we're doing great. Then I do a P&L review, or I do a review, or I talk to my banker, or I'm
Yeah.
looking,
And it's not great.
and it's not great. So I'm like, how in the heck can we come out of a meeting and, and then we would spend an inordinate amount of time on things that aren't driving the needle. And then when it came to the hard things, well, there was only 5 minutes left for that. And so I think that's really what it came down to is I'm like, wow, I think that we are not necessarily, we can measure as much as we want. And maybe there's use out of some of those at certain levels of the organization. But if we're not measuring the key drivers of our
Yeah.
business success, and our leadership team, our senior leadership team, our directors aren't all aligned to those 2, 3, or 4 metrics. And in our case, it was around margin, it was around inventory, it was around how those things were big contributors
Yeah.
to the overall balance sheet and in the health of the P&L.
And it's really common when companies get bigger for the strategy to get complex, and people are doing a lot of good stuff and they're measuring it and they're feeling good about it, and it inadvertently sometimes turns into vanity metrics, like
Mhm.
because it just makes them feel, and it's not because they're bad people, it just they're proud of their area and their department and they
Yeah.
get so zoomed in, and then the big picture gets missed, and it's hard to stay focused on those big value drivers
Yeah.
in when it's complex, and especially when the strategy starts getting really really wide. So what did you do? What were the changes that you made that helped to get back to the things that mattered most?
Yeah, and as mentioned, I think that I do fully agree. A players make a big difference. People,
They do.
you can have a good system, a good process, with, call it not mediocre, but just not A players, I'll say.
Yep.
And the process can help, but you're not going to get to excellence. You're not going to be the best.
Yep.
You can have great people with, I'd call it a mediocre process, but at least those great people can push through. And so I
Yep.
recognize it has to start with the right talent. And that's what we did. We first, it's a hard thing to do, but we we transitioned our entire executive team. And we
Can you
did it in
please say that
sequence.
again so people don't miss that? You made a
We
very big old
transitioned our entire senior executive team, not all at once. It was a sequence. Sequenced HR first because we needed a great HR partner that was going to help lead the charge. I needed a partner to do this. And then it was our chief operating officer. Then I was our chief financial officer. And I wanted to get the business right before we moved on to the chief commercial officer. We didn't want to, sales, although a priority, was the last step of all of this. And it was a year of sequencing the right talent in. And I mean, the results speak for themselves. 2023 was the best year the company has ever had from a profitability standpoint, from a revenue standpoint, from a balance sheet standpoint. I mean, we reduced inventory by almost 50%. That's no small task.
And your inventory is a very big number because you're a
It
business
was
that carries a
$105
lot.
million. Yeah, it was $105 million
Yeah.
in inventory. And now it's, down in the 50, 60 million. And that frees up cash flow. I mean, I had a leverage ratio issue where we were constantly right in the line of a leverage ratio that some could call troubling, especially banks that, they don't want to loan you more money when you've got that high leverage. And that's more than halved in less than a year's
Right.
time.
Because you had, let's just say, roughly $50 million tied up in excess inventory.
Yeah.
Which that 50 million bucks could be a big chunk of it in your bank account.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Paying
And those are
down
things that
debt.
happen with growth. And I'm sure there was good reasons in how people made those decisions and they didn't want to short. There's always reasons, but getting back to some of those basics. So tell me about your thought process about like replacing an entire executive team, even if it's sequential over an 18-month period, is something that there are likely other entrepreneurs and CEOs that know they probably should.
Mm-hmm.
But that's like, deciding to some people that you're gonna, jump into a hang glider by yourself when you've never even been in one before.
Yeah.
So share your thought process behind that, because those are very hard. Some of these are, good people that you're loyal to and you respected. Like you had really, they might not have been right for where you were going, but these weren't like bad humans.
No,
So
they were amazing
how did
people. They were like
Yeah.
family to me. I love them dearly.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of things. One is you recognize that you love them no matter what, but you have to love the business and the 600 associates that we have within our organization that need to grow and thrive. And so that was the number one realization. But the second was just like, in the US, we just had the Super Bowl. Super Bowl winning teams are a function of great leadership and great teams, great people. You have to recruit the best of the best. And so this is ironic. It might be ironic. When we recruited new talent, salaries actually went up. Our overall costs of labor, or call it leaders, talent, went up. And I repeat, we had our best year ever in the history of the company because we were hiring A player talent. We were hiring the best of the best in their specific domain. We weren't trying to get deals or bargains when we were recruiting people. I'd recruit 8 people would be on the deck and one would be the cheapest, one would be the highest, one would be in the middle. We were just finding the best, and we would reconcile. We need to figure out a way to afford the best. The best isn't always the most expensive either. I mean, we had some public CFOs that were asking for ungodly amounts of money. It was a cultural fit first. It was a technical fit. It was, all of these things had to play out, but we didn't use salary as a deterrent of why we wouldn't get the best people. We went and found the best people. And honestly, that's what started the momentum, because great people bring great ideas. They also bring other great people. And so,
isn't it funny?
Yeah, it actually put me in a weird spot because I was used to being the chief problem solver. And I was told by my coach that I can't do that anymore and I had to be more quiet. And I was, and it was amazing what others would bring to the table, and that the multiplicity of having great minds, they say the kind of the power of the group really emerged. And there's a lot of things that this team put in place that I never would have thought about. Actually, some things that when they were talking about, I'm scratching my head like, I wouldn't do that. You let them do it, and operations transformed, finance transformed, HR transformed, all elements of my organization. Really, it looks like a different company today than it did in the past. And so,
and you didn't figure it all out. You had amazing people that were doing a lot of the heavy thinking and heavy lifting.
Yeah, what I got to do is I got to stay in the lane that I feel like I'm really good at. And I got to get out of the way in areas where I might be a 7 out of 10 or a 6 out of 10 or a 5 out of 10, but I've always had to pretend to be a 10 out of 10 because I was filling in the gaps. It's pretty amazing when you've got people that are 8 or 9 out of 10s across the board in their specific domain, right? It's pretty incredible.
That's a massive transformation that you made that took a lot of courage and thinking to really get the team you needed for the next run. You had them for where you got to, and then you had to swap out a bunch of people. And so that's a big change. Let's talk about, how did you get, the strategy back to focused on the right things and the things that mattered most, as you talked about.
Yeah, that one was interesting because we had a great strategy consultant, and I love her dearly, and she's really good. I would say we weren't ready for the complexity of strategy deployment that she had. We still had a lot of things that we were trying to define. And so we have internal strategy resources, but we recognize we needed to go on the outside. We needed a resource. And really, that's where you and I connected. You connected us with Lance. Lance, I don't think we could have found a better person. Lance is amazing for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
One is he's an entrepreneur. He's kind of been in the job. He's seen a lot of businesses. But also the way that he listens and translates things that are going on, and then can I'd say reintroduce them in ways that everybody can understand. And so Lance was the game changer. But through Lance and our internal strategy coordinator, we were able to start chunking away at simplifying and really looking at the things that matter. I mean, our one-page strategic plan was probably the best answer to all of that. So we went from having multiple pages and a full wall and all of these different things, which is hard to manage and maintain, to having a one-page strategic plan. And so
Yeah.
for CEO, for me, I've got a dashboard that's really clear. And on that dashboard, we have our vision, mission, values, purpose in one area, the things that never change. Then we have all of the key metrics that matter, the 2 or 3 or 4 key metrics that matter. And in this case, balance sheet was part of it, where that was never part of it. That was buried in a P&L or in a,
Right.
financial statement somewhere where we only talked about it during that one meeting.
But you're talking about balance sheet being one part of your operational metrics that you're looking at.
It was,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
And things like return on invested capital, and we looking at inventory, we're looking at margin analysis, all of these things that, again, that drive our business. Every business is different, but our economic engine.
Lance was showing me your updated dashboard, and he showed me the old one and the new one. Lance is a dream to work with, and
He is.
he's obsessed with doing great work, and he's well suited for you and your team. Everyone has a different fit. But the one thing he was sharing is it's everything is boiled down very, very simple to the handful of things that really matter.
Yeah.
And a lot of spotlight. And one thing he's found, and others found in a similar state, is that also when you get bigger, it's different things you got to pay attention to.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't always translate for some people. And often people get so focused on their parts of the business. I mean, you got a substantial organization. So it's easy for people to get over focused on their departments or individual parts versus the macro health of the business.
Yeah. And I would say another thing that is, some people might think simplifying it dumbs things down, which it doesn't at all. Simplifying, what it did to us also is it forced us to hone in on priorities, like a few priorities, right? We used to be really good at trying to do everything. And we would just try, because I'm an idea person, right? I'm an entrepreneur,
Sure.
I'm take over the world. And what would happen is we would create our priorities, and then we would just continue to layer additional wish list things on there. And what would happen at the end of the year is we wouldn't get it all done. Then people could pick and choose the ones that they wanted to get done. The discipline that we've built in is, here's the 3 or 4 or 5 things that we are going to focus on, our rocks. And we review them quarterly. And I think the quarterly review is brilliant. We used to do it annually. And I think annually is a big mistake, because like everybody, you put all this annual stuff in there and there's a lot of fluff at the end maybe. And then everybody races to November and December to get those things done, or at least make it look like they're done. Doing them quarterly allows us to really give it a good, like, are these the right, so it gives you every quarter. Maybe something happens next quarter where we want to identify potentially something that should replace a priority. A great example is we had our rocks identified. Out of nowhere, an acquisition opportunity comes up. So I'm in a meeting and I'm talking to our strategy team, and I said, we're going to do the due diligence, we're going to review this, and I think if all looks good, we're going to move forward. Lance Cassidy, who runs our internal strategy, set a timeout, and they said, great, we can do this, but what are we going to take off of this quarter's priority so we can make the room for that? Now, as simple as that sounds, we would have never done that before.
Oh, you just added it on. You're a classic entrepreneur like the rest of us. Yes.
And it was hard because I'm like, no, but all that's important. We're going to do this and that. And they're like, yeah, no, you're not going to do it the right way. You can't. So let's push it on, not forever. Maybe we'll push this off for a quarter, but focus on this. And we did. And what happened was we were able to spend the amount of time that we needed, the focus, the resources, everything that we needed to do to integrate that acquisition, probably the best we've ever done in the history of our company. We spent the time, and because people weren't spinning plates, they didn't feel like they had to do this a little bit and that a little bit. So I would say the discipline that came out of that is probably one of the biggest takeaways. And
yeah, for sure. And you just came off spending 2 days with Jim Collins, and he's
yeah,
ferocious about discipline. Stick to the principles, stick to the basics. That's awesome. So if you could summarize from your perspective, there's a couple more questions here, but how do you, in your growth as a CEO, you've taken it from $1 million to a substantial business, and you're going to keep on rolling. And I ask you, how do you now have a different set of glasses on, or a different view or belief system around people, around strategy, and around numbers and your financial reporting? Each of those individually, people, strategy, numbers. What's your different perspective in the last couple of years that you're going to hold on to?
Well, as mentioned, you get great people, have a process that is simple but effective. Evaluate your economic engine, the things that matter the most that drive the business. I mean, those are the simple ways of saying it. I would say, though, what that means to me is, though I'm entrepreneurial, I also maybe was a little bit more limiting in how far we can take this. Because when limiting, meaning that when you feel the constraints of the business, you almost limit your mindset as to how far this can go. Because if you're the one that's the pace car, you only how far you can run. Honestly, what's happened to me, and even in this Jim Collins meeting when we were talking about BHAG, our BHAG has really grown the horizon. Like, I think that we can make this a $4 or $5, $6 billion company, where before, if you ask me that, $1 billion was my goal.
Interesting.
Because now I see the flywheel, and I can see how all of these pieces can come together, and we continue to bring in great people. And I don't have to worry about me figuring out, though. I'm a CEO of a company. I'm supposed to have the vision, support the strategy, and then put the resources together, or facilitate the resources, and then get out of the way. And I think this is probably one of the first times in my career, 28 years, where I don't see limits anymore. What I see is opportunity. We can feed this system.
Got it.
It's meant to be fed. You kind of get out of the way and let it go, and you bring in amazing people, and we have a great process. The sky's the limit, so long that the business that you've created, there's a market reason for it. There's a problem that you're trying to fix.
Which you have. So what's the biggest, so I got it. It's taken you and almost freed you up to be more of a visionary, strategic CEO with more confidence about what you can do. What was the biggest thing that changed that?
The constraint was around what I was able to do. And I'm living within a system that I was, I was the one doing the Rubik's.
You were way too integral in the performance of the system. Is that fair to say?
Right.
Got
yes.
it. And now you can see that you're almost more on top of the system versus in the middle of it, making it all happen.
Yeah. Yes. And where there's opportunities for growth, we just need to come up with the concepts and ideas, and then we put in the resources. It's not easy to recruit, but at least we know how to do that. And so, we incorporated something, strategic workforce planning, and my head of HR brought this to the table, which I think is a brilliant tool, which is, as you're building strategy, you're looking at what are the resources that you need to accomplish this. And then you look at those resources. Do you have them internally? And if you have that skill set internally, do they have the capacity? They don't have the capacity, go out and find those resources. But, before we would say, we want to build digital marketing. So we'd give it to IT or marketing and assume that we hired them with that skill set.
Right.
Now we're like, we want to build digital marketing. So let's assess, do we have the right people? Do they have the right skill set? Do they have the right capacity? So I mean, that's, again, part of our people process. But now that we layer in that process with our strategy process and having great people, it's like, okay, if we want to go to the moon, now we know that we're recruiting people to take us to the moon. And I have to build the ship, fly the ship, do the architecture, the engineering, and figure out the fuel, right? We come up with a concept and build the process. So it's,
Right. So you've got, to take a Collins principle, you've become more of a clock builder than a time teller,
Yeah.
right? Because it's more about the machine, even though you've already built a substantial business. And two, you really got to feel what it's like to be a strategic CEO and
Yep.
not have to have the burden of the operations.
And that is liberating. Like I said, that's a
Yes, of
feeling that I
course.
haven't had. And to get to that, I remember first reading about clock building and hearing it when I went to the seminar in Chicago. And it was really hard to figure out how to execute on because I was maybe too stuck in the weeds. The further you get down the path with this, and when clock building becomes something you're part of, it's almost like not only
Yeah.
is the burden taken off, but I can be the CEO the organization needs me to
Yeah.
be. And yeah, it
Yeah.
feels great. It's hard, and I
It
think a lot
is.
of entrepreneurs struggle with that because every entrepreneur is so integral into how the business was built, and one of the challenges that most entrepreneurs have is we know so much about the business. We're versus a hired gun who has that skill set to come in and help turn around or fix something.
Yes.
An entrepreneur that started with this knows every granular detail. And that can be debilitating at times because then you need every detail done the way that you need it to be done. And then you become the constraint in the system versus you're building a system, you're getting great people, you're letting those great people
Hmm.
execute on that system. And by the way, they're also helping to build that system. They might have other
Right. They
perspectives
will
or
bring their
visions.
own inputs into it. Yeah. Well, Lance and I talk a lot, and Lance's language for a lot of this is it's helping the entrepreneur or the CEO to build the right management system that enables them to do their job operationally, but then focus mostly strategically.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of this is just a better, simpler, or an alternate, simpler management system. And too bad Lance couldn't be here today. He's on a plane to Australia doing something similar with another one of our clients down there, working through some big strategic pivots. But it's this when you have this management system and it's simple, it allows the team to run and it gives you the confidence to keep going because you know what needs to happen.
Yeah,
It's pretty awesome.
it's
It's
really
exciting
awesome.
to hear this, Amish. I didn't know when we chatted, we're chatting, last week about some of the stuff even, but I didn't realize the part about how liberating it'd be. This is the first
Mm.
I've heard you explain it that way, and I totally see it. And I experience it in our when we chat, but it just clicked in my brain.
Well, coming out
Cool.
of the Jim Collins workshop, which by the way was one of the biggest, best, awesome, most incredible things I've done in my life. But I think that was the aha moment. It's like when you get that flywheel right, and then you start to imagine what happens when all of those components of the flywheel are executing it the way that you want. And you realize you don't have to be the one that's powering that flywheel, that you're bringing in great talent, and you sit back and I had this epiphany and I got excited. I'm like, wow, we can take this company so far. And it's not about ego or anything. It's about the service we're providing. I always say everybody deserves us because we can help them. And so the
Hmm.
better you can scale this capability, the more you're helping the world be better. In our case, it's supply chain, which is our mission, taking the friction out of the
Yeah.
supply chain. So why limit, something great?
Yeah.
Why not give it to the whole world to enjoy and make the world a better place?
Exactly. And really, we all have limits and we can feel the friction and the limits, but so if you were to go lots of CEOs, no matter what size and scale they're at, or founders, entrepreneurs, family businesses, all the different, types of people that are running these deals. And people find themselves constrained or shackled or burdened by the enterprise, and they can feel how their thinking and their ambition gets smaller. Or often then they start to think about selling because they don't believe they can
Right.
get to the next level, which I always like to find ways for people to keep going and keep going and growing. What is the one piece of advice you'd give to someone from what your perspective today? And when someone's kind of getting to that point where they're feeling stuck or shackled or burdened by their business, what the biggest advice you'd give if they wanted advice?
Yeah, and I think the wanted advice is the interesting point is that it's hard sometimes as a CEO, a founder, a top leader of an organization to one, ask for help, to show vulnerability, to
Mm,
accept that you've done great things, but you need resources or help to get through it. And that's business, that's life, that's everything that we do, and sometimes we forget these top athletes that we watch on TV, whether it's golf or what have they have coaches galore, right? They've got strength
yes.
coaches, they've got head
Nu-
coaches, they've got technique
nutritionists and
coaches.
this and that, and yes,
Nobody that's super successful really does it on their own. We might not see this, but nobody that's
correct.
super successful does this on their own. And I think that was probably one of my first areas of growth was, and it was years ago when I sold my company actually to a public company back in '05. That was a first learning for me because I got to see how a real company scales, how they invest in people,
Mm,
technology and strategy and resources. Growing up in a family business, we tend to underinvest until the time is needed. And that was an eye opener for me. Well, then as we go on, I put a board of advisors together, and those advisors were outstanding. Then you go on, and there comes a point where you really, we invest in everybody else. We give everybody else training and development. We give
yep.
everybody else coaches. We get, and I remember when somebody was saying, "Do you have a coach?" I said, "Oh, no, I give coaches to everybody. I'm cool." And then I came to the realization, I'm like, yeah, how am I continuing to sharpen my blade? And who can I talk to? And who's going to push me? And so, I think that's such a big component to it all is
Well, what
how do
helped
you,
you get over the edge? A lot of guys, gals, people who are in companies would say exactly what you said. Yeah, my people have them.
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
part of a CEO group. I'm good, right? So what made you decide to, or what got you to make that move?
The world is complex and ever changing. And it would take a lot of ego for anybody to think that they know it all and they have all the tools and all the resources. And I guess when you can feel confident enough and you can have,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it might be courageous, but you can have enough, I'd say, self-confidence where you're able to go to somebody and say, look, I want to take this thing to the moon, right? And
Yep.
I need help to get there. I don't think that's a bad thing. And I don't know why more people don't accept that. We ask for help in everything that we do in life until we don't, right? It's people that don't go to the doctors are the ones that end up with chronic disease. It's people that don't. That, one beautiful thing of this world is we have so many resources. We have
Yes.
resources, whether they're we have people that are free resources, we have people that are for higher resources, we have everybody in between because we
Yep.
know we can't do this alone. We're all better together. So what it took me is, frankly, I got stuck and I couldn't necessarily get myself unstuck on my own after fighting it and trying it. And I've got a
Yep.
APO group and I've got, I have resources, but I realized that I didn't have a resource that was specifically honed in on exactly me and
Mm-hmm.
what I needed that could push me, that could provide me with examples and provide me with experience. And I mentioned this in the case study, but I've summited many mountains, and I always like this example is that when you're climbing a mountain, you start at the bottom and you look up and you're like, okay, that's where I want to go, but you don't know what that looks like. The higher you get up the mountain, the better your perspective. Well,
Yeah.
you have to march up the mountain to get perspective. What if you asked somebody that had just climbed the mountain what that trail should look like, right? What if you've asked somebody that's done it a whole lot of times how to do it or what their experience share is? And what I found is once you do that, man, you're bringing experience and insight so you can go faster. Like I said, you can save the world if you want. Whatever your mission is, you can actually
Yeah.
accomplish that
You can do
faster
more.
and at more scale by bringing others in. So
Yeah, and like you, I acknowledge it's hard, and it took me a long time when I was early in my career. I've been doing this like 30 years, and I
yeah,
wanted to try and do it all by myself for quite longer than I should have.
yeah,
And once you start opening up yourself and getting help, and it takes a fair amount of confidence to go and ask somebody else for help on this stuff. Getting help
yeah,
for your team doesn't take as much. That's easier. But when it's
right.
about you, it's kind of like, going to the doctor when you need some of those intrusive examinations done, and
Yeah,
you're having a very personal experience,
yeah.
and that's
I
not
think
stuff.
it's
But once you
also
do it,
oh, go
go
ahead.
ahead. No, please go ahead.
I was saying, I think also, look, wherever you start that journey, if it's in business, I think it transfers over to other parts of your life. And so
For sure.
now my wife and I's relationship is super strong because I've actually become more maybe open to feedback and suggestions. I listen a little bit more. I know that I can
Maybe open to feedback and suggestions.
I can learn from her. There's more
Yes.
vulnerability in our conversations. So usually you don't have two sets of personality books that you play by, right? And so I started it in business and realized, wow, if I can listen more and be more effective as a leader at work? How can I be more effective as a leader at home? And actually,
Right.
you know,
And it spills over because we're the same person, Amish.
right,
And that's
right.
why, the book, Your Oxygen Mask First, on that side, it's about you,
Yep.
us as a leader. Because it's like there's a great saying one of my mentors said, hey, you can go do and knock on doors and help your sales team generate more sales, or you can go home and clean out your closet. Both are highly effective
Yeah,
because
right.
one spills over into the other. And I appreciate you saying about the personal life. Generally, when we're thriving as leaders and when we're thriving better at work, it totally spills over to home.
Yeah.
When you have a bad day at work, it goes home. And so, it's great that you got the momentum in the company and that's going and helping it to get to the next level. And it's wonderful that it spills over because it can't help it. So one last question, Amish, a little bit, we were going longer than I was hoping. So, but I just know I respect you and appreciate you making the time. What's, if we're sitting here having a conversation in, let's say 5 years, because we know you got a massive BHAG, you talked about multi-billion dollars of revenue and helping people. What would 5 years look like for you? What would be notably different for you in 5 years? That's that next mountaintop, I guess.
Yeah. So 5 years, one thing I'll say is about feel is I love what I do, and I feel good about what I do. I like the impact that I make. In 5 years, we should be getting better at what we do in such a way where it doesn't feel like I'm all over the place or I'm more stressed out or that the work is harder. I'd like to be able to perform and do more by doing less, by being able to master. And, there's all of these different levels, I think, of business. Is when we start out as entrepreneurs, we have to be really good doers. We've got to get shit done all the time, constantly. And it's the only, you don't have resources. Then you learn management, then you learn leadership, then you learn empowerment, then you go through this channel. And what my learning is I'd like to be able to lead an organization effectively, growing the organization effectively by now learning how to be the right leader, meaning empowering a great team, recruiting a right team, having that process in place where I don't feel like I'm at the grind in 5 years. I mean, I've been in a grind for a long time, not a bad grind, just a business grind. It's what we do.
Yep.
So in 5 years, I think I've won if the business is continuing to grow at a rate that I'm comfortable with, call it plus 10, 15% a year. Our margins continue to accelerate, but I'm doing it through others and allowing others that, the system that we build, the leaders that we've brought to the table. I think that to me, it's not about hitting a number. I mean, we want to hit a number, but it's really about how it feels. And that's like graduating to the next, level of leadership when things are great, you're doing okay, you're not always stressed. I'm not on my phone, I'm not checking this, I'm not getting bothered about this problem that's going on because we built a system that's doing that. And I think that's when you build a sustainable business that can last for generations. And that's my main goal. I think that's the PhD in business that I'm looking to achieve. It is.
Yeah, that's the ultimate for a strategic CEO or a person that becomes like the chairperson of the board, where you're leading through leaders and they're doing it and you're a part of it and you're supporting it, but they're really doing the lifting and the leading and they're having their own growth path as well.
Yep.
Awesome. Amish, thank you for taking the time to share this. It's a great story, and so many different entrepreneurs and CEOs will be able to relate. We go through these growth curves, it gets tough. You got to kind of retool some stuff, and then you get to the next one until you have to do it again. It's a never-ending journey.
All right.
Thank you very much.
For having
Appreciate
me.
it.
Enjoy the conversation.
Yes.